Look,
Two
we just
men
need
were
to maintain
told by
order here.
mod
Can
police
you
to
agree to stay on
leave.
the sidewalk?
Don't tell me what
We
to
can
do
do
with your
that,
toy
but we need
gun.
assurance that our
Their
presence won't be
friendship
disrupted.
began in high school when they bonded over their mutual passion for movies, video games, and more recently, cosplay. Every weekend, they would search for unique locations, trying to capture memorable moments dressed in their favorite costumes. They loved the thrill of walking around in elaborate outfits, pretending to be characters from their favorite stories, and showing off their creativity. It wasn't just about the costumes, it was about the experience, the smiles, the reactions from people, and the freedom to be someone else for a while. On a warm, sunny Saturday, the two friends decided to visit a park that was well known for being a popular spot for cosplay events. It was an open space, surrounded by trees, with a small lake in the middle, and people would gather there for everything from casual picnics to organized events. Jake and Alan thought it was the perfect place to test out their new outfits, take some cool pictures, and perhaps meet other cosplayers along the way. Jake, being the more daring of the two, had decided to go all out with his costume this time. He dressed as a character from an action film, an imposing figure with a tough exterior. He wore a leather jacket, sunglasses, and carried a prop that would be hard to miss, a toy gun. The gun was realistic in design, an intricate silver replica of a futuristic firearm. It wasn't real, of course, but the level of detail made it look like something right out of a movie set. Jake loved how it completed the look, adding an extra layer of authenticity to his character. He carefully placed it in his holster, making sure it was visible but not too much of a focus, thinking it would add to the dramatic effect. Alan, on the other hand, was more reserved when it came to his costume choices. He loved the creative side of cosplay but preferred simpler outfits. This time, he chose to dress as a wizard, wearing a long robe and a pointed hat. It was the kind of outfit that would make you feel like you had just stepped out of a fantasy novel. He didn't carry any props that might be mistaken for dangerous weapons. Instead, he had a staff made of light wood, which gave him a mystical look without drawing too much attention. Alan's focus was on the fun of the event and capturing the right moments on his camera. They arrived at the park, excited about the day ahead. The park was alive with energy. People dressed as superheroes, pirates, and medieval knights walked around with pride, chatting and laughing. The air was filled with excitement, and you could tell that everyone was there to have a good time. The two friends joined in, walking through the crowd, taking pictures with other cosplayers, and enjoying the attention they got from both curious onlookers and fellow enthusiasts. As they were walking along the path near the lake, they noticed a group of teenagers staring at them. At first, Jake thought they were just admiring their costumes, but as he got closer, he saw one of them whispering to the others. Some of the teenagers seemed uneasy. Jake didn't think much of it and waved at them, thinking it was just typical awkward teenage behavior. Alan, noticing the stares, raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He figured maybe they were just nervous because Jake's gun did look pretty realistic. But before they could get too far, one of the people in the group, a man in his late 20s, walked up to them. He seemed to be wearing a volunteer uniform, dark pants, a black shirt with a small logo on it, and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. Jake assumed he was part of the park staff, maybe someone overseeing the event. The man didn't smile or greet them in any friendly way. Instead, he immediately addressed them in a calm but firm tone. "Hey, you guys need to be careful with that toy," the man said, nodding toward Jake's toy gun. Jake paused, confused. "What do you mean? It's just a prop." The man frowned, his eyes scanning the area around them. "I know it's a prop, but it looks too real. You're scaring people around here. Some of the kids are getting nervous." Alan, sensing the awkwardness of the situation, stepped in. "We didn't mean to cause any trouble. We're just having fun. It's just a toy gun." The man wasn't convinced. "I understand, but you can't just walk around here with something that looks like a real weapon. It's not safe." Jake's face turned serious. He wasn't one to back down easily, especially when it came to his creativity and his love for cosplay. "It's a toy gun," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "It's part of the costume. We're not hurting anyone." The man shook his head. "I get that, but you still need to leave. It's against the rules. We have a policy here. No toy guns, no props that look like real weapons." Jake laughed, half in disbelief. "Are you kidding me? It's a park. It's a cosplay event. People dress up all the time. It's not like we're actually using it." Alan, who had been quiet for a few moments, added, "Look, we didn't mean to upset anyone. We'll put it away." But the man was unmoved. "I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. You need to leave. Now." Jake stared at the man, shocked. He'd attended several cosplay events in the past and had never encountered anything like this. The idea of being told to leave just because of a prop seemed completely out of line. "Are you seriously telling us to leave for a toy gun?" he asked, his voice rising slightly in disbelief. The man's expression remained stern. "Yes, I am." Jake wasn't one to let things slide. He stood tall, refusing to back down. "You can't just tell us to leave. We're not doing anything wrong." The situation was beginning to draw the attention of other park-goers. Some people in the crowd began to notice the exchange, glancing over at Jake and Alan, whispering among themselves. A few people even seemed to be filming the interaction on their phones. The pressure was building. Alan could feel the tension in the air, and he knew this wasn't going to end easily. Alan tried to step in again, his voice calm but firm. "Look, we'll leave if it's really a problem, but this doesn't seem fair." But the man wasn't backing down. "It's not just my decision. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." Jake scoffed, shaking his head. "Call security for a toy gun?" At that moment, a second figure appeared, this time someone dressed in a full black uniform with a badge on the chest. It was clear that this was a member of the park's security team. The man in the uniform approached them, his expression unreadable. Without saying much, he looked at the toy gun and then at Jake and Alan. "I heard what's going on," he said. "You're going to have to leave." Jake's mind raced as the situation grew more intense. The words of the security guard echoed in his head. "You need to leave." It was hard for him to believe what was happening. They had just arrived at the park, excited to enjoy the day, take pictures, and meet other people dressed up in their favorite costumes. Now, in a matter of minutes, they were being told to leave over a harmless toy gun. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He looked at Alan, who seemed just as confused and frustrated. Alan had always been the more level-headed of the two, the one who could usually talk his way out of any awkward situation. But today, even Alan was struggling to understand why they were being singled out. They had seen plenty of people walking around with props before: swords, staffs, shields, and even lightsabers. None of them had been asked to leave, so why were they being treated like criminals? "Are you seriously going to make us leave over this?" Jake asked again, his voice now sharper. He was trying to keep it together, but it was hard. His anger was bubbling up, and it was difficult to ignore. "It's just a toy. This is a cosplay event. People dress up all the time." The security guard didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced back toward the entrance to the park. Jake noticed that the guard seemed to be waiting for backup, as if he had already made up his mind that they were causing trouble. Alan could feel the tension building. The last thing they wanted was for the situation to spiral out of control. They had come here for fun, not for an argument, but Jake wasn't backing down. As the moments passed, more people started to notice what was going on. Some walked by, slowing down to see what the commotion was about. A few even stopped to watch the scene unfold. The park, which had been buzzing with laughter and excitement only moments earlier, now felt a lot quieter. There was an awkward stillness in the air. A couple of people began to gather around, probably drawn in by the noise. Some were whispering to each other, while others seemed to be filming the situation on their phones. Jake could hear them murmuring, "What's going on? And is everything okay?" Jake hated that people were watching. It wasn't just the toy gun anymore. It was the fact that the situation was escalating and they were at the center of it. A few people even began to take sides. Some seemed to be on the security guard's side, saying things like, "I get it. It's too realistic," while others, including a couple of cosplayers in the crowd, were shaking their heads in disbelief. "It's just a prop," one of them muttered. Alan, sensing the growing crowd, pulled Jake aside and lowered his voice. "Jake, let it go, man. We're not getting anywhere like this." But Jake wasn't listening. He was fired up, feeling like he was being unfairly singled out for something that didn't deserve all this attention. He wasn't just going to walk away quietly without understanding why this was happening. "I'm not leaving just because some guy has an issue with a toy gun. This is ridiculous." The security guard, seeing that Jake wasn't backing down, stepped closer. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "If you don't leave now, I'll have to call the park authorities." Jake took a step back, running his hand through his hair. His eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of the park authorities the security guard mentioned. It was becoming clearer by the second. This wasn't just about a toy gun. It was about control. The park had its rules, and for some reason, it felt like Jake and Alan were being made an example of. He felt his blood pressure rising. "I'm not going anywhere until I understand why we're being treated like this," Jake snapped, his voice steady but firm. Alan sighed. "Jake, please." He didn't want to make things worse. He wanted to leave and find somewhere more peaceful to take photos. They'd been looking forward to spending the day in the park, not getting into an argument with security. But Jake was stubborn. He had always been that way. And right now, he felt like his sense of fairness was being trampled. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another figure, this time, a woman in a black jacket with a badge on her chest. She seemed to be in charge, walking toward them with a calm but authoritative air. She was much taller than the others, with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude. As she approached, she immediately focused on the toy gun. "Is there a problem here?" the woman asked, her voice steady. There was no question in her tone, just the kind of professional detachment that made it clear she was used to handling situations like this. The security guard quickly explained what had happened, recounting how Jake and Alan had refused to leave after being told their prop was too realistic. The woman listened carefully, her eyes scanning Jake's costume and the toy gun in his holster. Jake could tell she was evaluating the situation, weighing the rules against the reality of what was happening. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "We understand that you're here to have fun, but we can't allow props that resemble real weapons. It's a safety issue." She paused again, her gaze shifting between Jake and Alan. "The park is full of families, children, and people who may be frightened by something like that. We've had incidents in the past where people have mistaken props for real weapons." Jake was taken aback. He had never considered that someone might get scared by a toy gun, but at the same time, he felt frustrated. He had been to enough cosplay events to know that people often carried realistic-looking props. They were part of the experience. He didn't understand why today was different. "That's the thing," Jake argued. "It's just a prop. We're not trying to scare anyone. This is a cosplay event. People dress up in costumes all the time. How is this any different?" The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. You're trying to have fun, and we appreciate that. But we have to think about the safety of everyone here. And with the way things are these days, it's better to be cautious. We can't have people walking around with something that could be mistaken for a real weapon." Jake's frustration deepened, but he couldn't argue with her logic. He hated that their fun was being cut short, but part of him understood that there were bigger issues at play. The world had changed. People were more sensitive, more aware of safety risks. Alan had been right earlier. Sometimes it was better to just walk away. Finally, Jake exhaled sharply. "Fine," he said. "We'll leave, but this is ridiculous." The woman gave him a sympathetic look. "I know it's frustrating, I really do, but we have rules for a reason. We'll make sure you're not disturbed while you pack up." Alan, who had been silently watching the exchange, stepped forward. He put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Let's just go. We'll find another place to take some pictures." The crowd, who had been watching the scene unfold, began to disperse as Jake and Alan slowly made their way to the park's exit. Some people looked at them with sympathy, while others appeared to understand why the park had made the decision. Jake couldn't help but feel a sting of disappointment. He hoped for a fun, carefree day. Instead, they were leaving under a cloud of frustration. As they walked away, Jake muttered, "It's just a toy gun, I still don't get it." Alan smiled faintly. "I know, man. But sometimes, it's better to let it go." Jake and Alan walked away from the park, but the situation didn't feel over. It wasn't just the fact that they had been asked to leave for something so trivial, it was how unfair it all seemed. Jake's mind was still racing, thoughts bouncing from one to another, trying to make sense of everything. He couldn't believe they had been kicked out of a public space over a toy gun, of all things. It didn't sit right with him. The whole thing felt unnecessary, like an overreaction. As they stepped off the park grounds and into the quieter streets outside, Jake couldn't stop himself from muttering angrily under his breath. "That was messed up, Alan. Seriously. I just don't get it." A toy gun. His voice was filled with frustration, and his hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket as he walked. "We were just having fun, and they acted like we were dangerous criminals or something." Alan, on the other hand, was trying to keep his cool. It wasn't that he didn't understand Jake's frustration. He did. But he had been in situations like this before. Sometimes, life just didn't make sense, and it was easier to let go than fight every little thing. He wanted to calm Jake down, to remind him that they didn't need to waste energy being angry over something so petty. But he also knew Jake was stubborn, and once he felt like he'd been wronged, there was no letting it go easily. "I know it's frustrating, Jake," Alan said, trying to keep his tone even. "But getting upset isn't going to change anything. We got asked to leave and we left, that's it." Jake turned to Alan, his face serious. "But we didn't do anything wrong. The gun's a prop. It's not even real. It's not like we were causing any harm." "I get that," Alan said, "but there are rules for a reason, even if they seem stupid sometimes. If people are worried or scared, it's better just to avoid the situation. You know how people get these days. Everything's so sensitive and it doesn't take much to cause a panic." Jake let out a deep breath, still feeling the weight of the injustice. "Yeah, but it's just a costume, a part of a character. I mean, if people are too scared of a plastic gun, then maybe they shouldn't come to cosplay events." "I know," Alan replied, trying to offer some perspective. "But look at it this way. We're not the only ones here. There are kids, families, people who might not get what cosplay is. They might just see a guy with a gun and freak out. It's not our fault, but we can't control how other people react." Jake didn't say anything for a moment. He looked around at the street they were walking down, his thoughts swirling. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the buildings. The busy sounds of the park were now replaced by the hum of city traffic in the distance. Despite the chaos of the day, the quiet made him feel a little calmer. Alan was right, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. Still, there wasn't much more they could do. Arguing with the security guards, or even with the real police, wasn't going to change anything now. Alan stopped walking and turned to face Jake. "Look, I know you're upset, but what's done is done. Maybe we should just go grab something to eat and forget about it for now. We can always try another park later or find a new spot to hang out." Jake paused, looking at Alan with a mix of annoyance and exhaustion. He could tell Alan was just trying to make him feel better. But in that moment, Jake wasn't sure if he wanted to be comforted. He wanted to be heard, to have someone acknowledge that the situation wasn't fair. But Alan was right about one thing: they couldn't change what had already happened. "Yeah, you're right," Jake finally muttered, looking down at his shoes. He had been angry, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to let it go. He wasn't sure if he fully understood what had happened, but getting upset about it over and over wouldn't solve anything. They walked together to a small cafe a few blocks away from the park. The place was cozy, with dim lighting and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. The quiet ambience of the cafe was a relief after the tension of the park. As they sat down at a corner table, they ordered coffee and snacks, hoping that a little break would help clear their heads. While they waited for their drinks, the conversation shifted. They talked about everything and nothing: work, old movies they loved, even their plans for next weekend. It was the kind of normal conversation they were used to, but something felt different now. Jake's mind still kept drifting back to the park, but he didn't want to ruin the moment by dragging the conversation back to the same old argument. "Do you ever feel like people just don't understand what cosplay is all about?" Jake asked, suddenly feeling the weight of the question on his shoulders. Alan looked at him thoughtfully. "Yeah, sometimes. I mean, we know it's about creativity, expression, and having fun. But a lot of people see it as weird or childish, and they just don't get why someone would put so much effort into something like that. They don't understand that it's about passion, you know?" Jake nodded. "Exactly. It's more than just wearing a costume. It's about bringing something to life. It's about escaping reality for a while and living in a world where anything is possible. But people don't see that. They just see the surface, someone dressed up with a toy gun, and they think it's a threat." "It's sad, really," Alan added. "People are so quick to judge. I mean, if they knew the amount of work and thought that goes into some of these costumes, they'd probably change their minds. But most of the time, they don't bother. They just make assumptions." Jake took a sip of his coffee, feeling a little calmer now. It wasn't that he was happy about what happened, but he understood Alan's point. Sometimes it wasn't about winning the argument. Sometimes it was about choosing to let go of the fight. He realized that the incident wasn't just about the toy gun or the park rules. It was about people's perceptions, and how quickly things could spiral out of control when those perceptions weren't challenged. "Maybe we should focus on the positives," Jake said, looking at Alan with a small smile. "We still had a good time at the park before all of that. We got some great photos, and we met a bunch of cool people. Maybe next time we'll be a little more careful with our props, you know?" Alan smiled back, relieved to see Jake calming down. "Yeah, next time we'll find a place where people get it, but you're right. We had fun, and that's what matters. We can always try again." As they sat there, sipping their coffee and chatting, the earlier tension slowly faded. They didn't have the answers to everything, but they had each other's company, and that was enough for now. There would be other cosplay events, other places to explore, and more chances to dress up as their favorite characters. And maybe, just maybe, next time, the world would be a little more understanding. Jake and Alan had been sitting in the cafe for over an hour, just talking and relaxing. The tension from earlier had melted away, and for a moment the frustration seemed distant. They were chatting about random things: movies, old video games, the latest trends in cosplay. But in the back of Jake's mind, something still gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The whole situation at the park had left a sour taste in his mouth. He glanced at his phone, checking the time. "It was almost 4 p.m. I know we said we'd let it go," Jake said slowly, his voice low. "But I just can't stop thinking about what happened." Alan, who had been quietly sipping his coffee, glanced at him and sighed. "I figured you'd say that," he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I know you, Jake. You're not the type to just walk away from something that doesn't make sense. But honestly, what do you think we can do now? The park won't let us back in, and we're not going to change their minds. It's done." Jake rubbed his temples, trying to push away the frustration. He knew Alan was right. There was nothing they could do now, but it still felt unfair. It was as if they'd been treated like troublemakers for something so small. Jake's mind was still racing through all the what-ifs and why-nots. He hated feeling powerless. "I just don't get it, man," Jake said again, this time with a bit more resignation in his voice. "We were just trying to have fun. People cosplay all the time. Why was it such a big deal?" Alan leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "You're right. Cosplay is about having fun, being creative, and letting your imagination take over. But not everyone gets that. Not everyone sees the value in it. To some people, it's just weird or childish. And honestly, with the world the way it is now, people are on edge. They see something that looks like a weapon and they freak out. I know, but it's just a toy, and we weren't even bothering anyone. We were just walking around and taking pictures. Why did it have to go this far?" "It's because people don't always stop to think before reacting," Alan replied. "They see something that looks dangerous, and their first instinct is to protect themselves. It's not ideal, but that's just how things are right now." Jake paused, staring out the cafe window. The street outside was busy, people walking by in all directions. Some were dressed in business clothes, others in casual outfits, but everyone seemed to be moving fast, lost in their own thoughts. The world outside was moving on, unaffected by the incident at the park. It was hard to let go of the feeling that they had been wronged, but maybe Alan had a point. Maybe it wasn't worth getting upset about anymore. Maybe it was better to focus on what they could control instead of wasting energy on something that had already passed. "Yeah, I guess," Jake muttered, feeling the weight of the situation begin to lift. He looked back at Alan, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm not going to lie, though. I still feel like it was unfair, but I'm trying to move on." Alan smiled, glad to see Jake starting to relax. "That's all we can do, man. Let it go and enjoy the rest of the day. Who knows? Maybe we can find a better place to hang out, somewhere people appreciate what we're doing." Jake nodded slowly, appreciating his friend's advice. Alan always knew how to put things into perspective, and maybe that was exactly what Jake needed, someone to remind him not to sweat the small stuff. Just as they were about to finish their drinks, the door to the cafe opened, and in walked two uniformed police officers. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The last thing he needed was another confrontation. The officers glanced around the room before their eyes fell on Jake and Alan. One of them, a tall officer with short cropped hair, walked over to their table. He smiled politely but had an air of authority. "Hey, gentlemen, mind if we have a word with you?" the officer asked, his tone calm. Jake and Alan exchanged a quick glance. Sure," Alan said, a bit confused. "What's this about?" The officer motioned to the chair next to their table. "Mind if I sit down for a second? Just a quick chat." Both of them felt uneasy. Alan leaned back slightly in his chair, trying to read the officer's face. He didn't know what to expect, but he hoped it wasn't another argument or, worse, a ticket or something ridiculous. The officer pulled out a small notebook and opened it, writing something down quickly before looking up again. "I understand you had a bit of a run-in at the park earlier today," he asked, his voice steady but friendly. Jake's heart sank. This was it. This was what he'd been dreading. He looked at Alan, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. "Yeah, we were asked to leave," Jake said, his voice flat. "Apparently, having a toy gun with our costumes wasn't allowed. They said it looked too real and we were causing problems." The officer listened intently, nodding as Jake spoke. He then glanced at his partner, who had been standing a few feet away, quietly observing the conversation. The second officer gave a small nod, and then the first one turned back to them. "Right, I see," the officer said, pausing. "Well, we're just here to make sure everything's okay. We've been getting a few calls about the park today, people concerned about safety. And yeah, sometimes things like that can get blown out of proportion. It's not always easy to figure out what's going on from a distance." We just want to make sure everyone's safe and that situations like this don't escalate." Jake felt a small relief, but his frustration still lingered. "I get that," he said, "but it just felt like we were being singled out for no reason. We were just having fun." The officer nodded again. "I understand, and I'm sorry it went down the way it did. You've got every right to have fun and express yourselves. Just keep in mind that not everyone sees things the same way, and sometimes it's better to avoid any misunderstandings. But hey, I'm glad you guys are okay." Jake stared at him for a moment, not sure what to make of the officer's response. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a confrontation either. The situation seemed to have cooled down, and the officer's approach was more understanding than he'd expected. "We're just here to make sure there's no trouble," the officer added with a smile. "And looks like you two are good. Just keep an eye out next time, all right?" Jake nodded, feeling a little less tense. "Yeah, I understand. Thanks for the chat." The officer gave a friendly wave, then walked out of the cafe, his partner following behind. The door closed softly and the room felt quieter now, like the storm had passed. "Well, that was weird," Alan said after a beat, "but I guess we're good." "Yeah, I guess so," Jake replied. "I'm just glad it didn't turn into anything worse." Alan grinned. "Hey, at least we didn't get arrested." Jake chuckled, the tension fully gone now. He wasn't sure if that had been a warning, a formality, or just a way for the police to make sure everything was settled, but he felt like they'd dodged a bullet. It was a relief to know that the day hadn't ended in a full-on confrontation. As the two friends sat back and finished their drinks, the weight of the day seemed to lift even more. Jake realized that maybe, sometimes the best way to deal with things wasn't by pushing back or fighting every little battle. It was just by letting things slide, learning and moving forward. And right now, moving forward felt like the best option. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur for Jake and Alan. After the strange encounter with the police officers, the two of them decided to leave the cafe and head back to the park, but not to the same spot they had been earlier. They didn't want to push their luck or risk running into more issues. The air was cooler now, and the sky was tinged with shades of purple and orange as the sun began to set. The peacefulness of the evening made everything feel a bit calmer, and by the time they reached the park again, their anger had mostly faded. They stood near the entrance for a moment, looking around at the families packing up their picnic baskets, joggers taking their evening runs, and children riding bikes. It wasn't the same lively scene they had experienced earlier, but it still felt like home, like a place where they could just be themselves without worrying about the rules of the world outside. "Do you think we'll be okay here now?" Alan asked, glancing at Jake. Jake hesitated. "I don't know, I guess we'll see, but I'm done making a scene. Let's just hang out and enjoy the park for what it is, not what we want it to be." Alan nodded, understanding that Jake wasn't ready to dive into another confrontation. They'd already been through enough for one day. Jake took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. The park still held a kind of magic in it, even if it hadn't turned out as they had expected. He was willing to let go of the anger and try to enjoy the last few hours of daylight. They decided to take a walk along the lake this time, away from the busy center of the park where they had been earlier. The path was quiet, lined with tall trees, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze felt soothing. The water of the lake glistened in the fading light, reflecting the colors of the sky above. For the first time all day, Jake felt like he could breathe again. It wasn't about the costume or the toy gun or the rules. It was about being there with his best friend, enjoying the moment. "I've been thinking about something," Jake said after a few minutes of walking in silence. Alan looked at him curiously. "I guess I was so focused on how unfair the whole thing felt that I forgot to appreciate what we were actually doing." Alan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, yeah, the park kicked us out and it was annoying," Jake continued, kicking a small stone along the path. "But we were out here having fun. We got some great pictures, we met some cool people, and we were just being ourselves. That's what this whole thing is about, right? Not everyone's going to get it, and not everyone's going to agree with what we're doing. But that doesn't mean we should let it ruin our day. Alan smiled, nudging Jake's shoulder lightly. You're finally coming around, huh? Jake grinned back. Maybe. It just took me a little longer to realize it. It's easy to get caught up in the small stuff, especially when it feels like you've been wronged. But we're here for the experience, not the rules or the opinions of other people. You know, Alan said thoughtfully, that's why I love doing this with you. You get so caught up in your ideas, but in the end, you always manage to see the bigger picture. Jake laughed. Yeah, maybe a little too late sometimes, but I get it now. I think we let the whole situation get to us more than we should have. They walked in silence for a little while longer, just enjoying the serenity of the lake and the cool breeze. The sun was almost gone now, replaced by a sky full of stars that seemed to shine just a bit brighter in the calmness of the evening. The park had quieted down and the sounds of the world seemed far away. For a brief moment, it felt like time had slowed and everything was right in the world again. After a while, they found a bench near the lake and sat down. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple wooden bench, but it felt like the perfect place to sit and reflect. The park wasn't so bad now. The earlier frustrations had faded into the background, replaced by a sense of calm. They could still hear a few people laughing in the distance, but it didn't bother them anymore. I guess the whole toy gun thing wasn't as big of a deal as we thought, Alan said, his voice relaxed. I mean, it's over now. We're here and no one's bothering us. It's not the end of the world. Jake leaned back against the bench, looking up at the stars. He didn't want to admit it, but Alan was right. They had let something small turn into something much bigger than it needed to be. Now, sitting here in the quiet of the park, it felt like they had come full circle. The world hadn't stopped spinning because of their little misunderstanding, and that was the reality they needed to accept. Sometimes it wasn't about winning or losing, it was about making the most of the experience. You're right, Jake said, his voice softer now. We made it bigger than it was, and now it's over, we're fine. Exactly, Alan said with a grin. And next time we'll just be a little more careful, no more toy guns in the park. Jake laughed. Yeah, maybe no guns next time, but I'm not giving up on the cosplay. Oh, of course not, Alan said with a wink. Cosplay is life, man. The two of them shared a laugh, and for a while they just sat there in silence, enjoying the simple joy of being together, away from the noise and chaos of the world outside. It was moments like these that made everything worth it. Sure, things hadn't gone according to plan, but in the end they were still friends, still having fun and still enjoying the world in their own unique way. The evening wore on, and eventually they decided it was time to leave. The park was quieter now, the last few visitors heading out as the stars filled the sky. Jake and Alan made their way toward the exit, walking side by side. As they walked through the park, they passed the area where they had originally been confronted by the mod police. But this time there was no anger, no frustration, just a sense of peace. It felt like a chapter had closed and they were ready for the next adventure. I'm glad we came back here, Jake said, his voice light and easy. It's funny how things can feel completely different once you've let go of the anger, Alan smiled. Yeah, sometimes you just have to let things slide. There's no point in holding on to stuff that's already over. As they reached the exit, the night air was cool, and the lights from the park created a peaceful glow in the distance. They stepped out onto the sidewalk, ready to head home. The day hadn't gone the way they had expected, but in the end, it had been a day they wouldn't forget. It was a reminder that sometimes things don't always go according to plan, but that doesn't mean you can't enjoy the journey anyway. We'll find another park next weekend, Jake said, turning to Alan. And this time, we'll get some really great pictures. No interruptions, no problems. Alan nodded, a smile on his face. Sounds perfect. As they walked down the street, the weight of the day seemed to have completely lifted. They were looking forward to the future, and that was all that mattered. Their friendship, their creativity, and the fun they had together were what really made the day worth it. The rest was just noise. And in that moment, it felt like everything was exactly as it should be.